We've just come in from a session where we had our two Prime Ministers speaking with some AUT students about leadership and about the present and particularly about the future, and that seems a very good place to begin. We live in a world that is always different, but this moment seems to have its own particular challenges, which we've already begun discussing. I was wondering if we might start with you. I've been licensed to call them Helen and Malcolm. I'm not being rude, but that's been an insistence of them both through their humility. I might invite you to begin, Helen, by thinking about what you see as being the greatest challenge and the greatest opportunity that's facing us in the 2020s and beyond.
Well, we opined on this at the event at ANZ this morning, and Malcolm began by saying, the climate crisis is like an existential threat, and I added a couple of others which are identified by the elders, which is one of the groupings I'm associated with. We talk about climate crisis, threat of nuclear war, and artificial intelligence, all as existential threats which we have to manage and navigate around. We live in times of great uncertainty. Volatility is the new normal. It's all the more reason for New Zealand to be thinking very carefully how it navigates all these current and major issues. I think if we look at the particular challenges which confront our own country, we are not economically successful enough to invest in what we need to maintain our living standards and provide services to our people and do it in a sustainable way. So we've got a range of challenges. We also have the brains to solve them and the ability to solve them if we want to. But I think that comes down to a question of leadership.
So we need leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll adopt what Helen said. I agree with what Helen said. I'll just add another one, which is a sort of more of a geopolitical one, which is that we're living now unequivocally in a might is right world. I mean, the reality is that the United States, our great friend and security partner and so forth, is now, its administration essentially shares the political values of Vladimir Putin. I'm not suggesting that Donald Trump is murderous like Vladimir Putin, but essentially might is right. That's that. Now that is a very big change, because after the Second World War, all of the international institutions that were set up, including the UN, which Helen played such a distinguished role, as we've heard, was set up to counter might is right. That's why the UN Charter asserts that all states should be given respect, their sovereign autonomy should be respected. In other words, so that the strong cannot do as they will and the weak suffer as they must. Now, Trump does not believe in that, and he doesn't even pretend to believe in it. In fact, he says he doesn't believe in it. So that is a very big change. And I mean, you're all familiar with it. Painfully, we see too much of American politics in our media, but that is a very big change, and I think we're only just starting to get our heads around it.
Where might the opportunity lie in that?
Well, opportunities. Now, I forgot to get onto that. Look, I'm very optimistic, right? I think this is a most exciting time to be alive, a most exciting time to be young. The technological change of pace and scale of change has never been as great as it is today. Artificial intelligence, yes, it has some frightening aspects, but also enormous opportunities. So I think the critical thing is to be confident, to be imaginative, and to be prepared to have a go. And don't be afraid of being set back. And you've got to, I agree with Helen about leadership, and in terms of the economy, and I hear that all of you in New Zealand are feeling a bit down in the dumps about the economy. The last thing you want to do is be talking it down. You've got to be upbeat. You've got to be on the front foot and be positive. And when I say you, I don't mean you. I'm not lecturing you. I'm saying all of us. All of us have to be like that. That was absolutely the approach I took as Prime Minister. And, sometimes people made fun of me for it. But nonetheless, you're better off talking up your opportunities, being confident, being positive, than you are going, oh gosh, everything's, we'll all be ruined. And I mean, that's very easy to say, right? But it gets you nowhere. So you've got to get moving and be imaginative, yeah.
Well, confidence is quite a fragile thing, right? So I watched as the new Labor government came into office in the UK last year and almost immediately adopted a sort of stance of, well, things are really difficult and challenging here and we're going to have to make very hard decisions, and people's expectations just sunk. And they stopped spending. And when businesses stop investing and people stop spending, you go into a downward spiral which is hard to come out of.
Yeah, on that note, I think we're all noticing that Auckland is on that crest of becoming, reaching its full sort of efflorescence at the moment as we see the City Rail Loop come online. And as this week, we're very proud here at AUT to be hosting the World Indigenous Peoples Conference on Education, which will be the largest academic conference ever held in New Zealand. That's an Auckland promo, doing what you asked.
Good. No, well, that's good.
Thinking positively.
That's good. Cities rock. Okay, it's fantastic.
But some of what you were talking about sort of drives at scale, and we know that particularly AI is based on these extraordinary scales that we've never had in humanity before, particularly around data. And as we face a world where scale seems to matter, and where even Australia, but particularly New Zealand, do not have scale, there seems to be a unique kind of series of questions for our nation. So I'm wondering how Australia and New Zealand might be able to work together in a world to build support for our own well-being, for our entry into markets and sustaining our standard of living.
Well, look, what was hugely important for New Zealand decades ago was to go into the closer economic partnership with Australia, because we linked ourselves to an economy which is a growth engine for us, attracting rather too many of our people at the moment, but that's another matter. But it was, and maybe still is, one of the world's most comprehensive free trade areas, and every government over the years has had ambition to deepen that relationship. So in effect, we operate as one economy without barriers. We still have, miraculously, free movement of peoples between the two countries. I mean, we don't share every view in common. Let's face it, Australia's had a different view of its defence arrangements to that of New Zealand for about the last 40 years, although things are a little on the slide here, in my opinion. But by and large, the Australians are our best mates, and it's been a good association.
Yeah, I mean, apart from, ritual humiliations on the sporting field, we've got nothing against you, so we're very best good friends. We just have to get over that horrible experience, regular horrible experience.
No. Moving from there to climate change, which I know has been important to the leadership both of you have given to both the world and our nations. Can you speak, especially as a COP unfolds in the world and as it sort of rises to the front of our minds again, often it falls away from it, your perspectives on where we're at and where we should be headed? I might begin with Malcolm this time.
Okay, well, look, we're better off than we would have been if we didn't have a COP. Like has the Paris Agreement fulfilled its promise? No, not entirely, but we're a lot better off than we'd probably be we're heading for 2% and a bit warming at current trajectory, which is too much. Without Paris, we'd be heading for over 4%. So, but look, I'm really confident on the global warming issue, at least the response to it. Technology has come to our aid. Renewables are now cheaper than generating electricity with fossil fuels. So, when I was Howard's Environment Minister back in 2007, in those amazing years when both sides of Australian politics agreed on an emissions trading scheme, can you imagine that? There was this brief period where there was rationality in Australian politics on climate. But at that point, the big question was, how much extra are we going to have to pay to save the planet, to pay for renewables? And now they're cheaper. So, So that is the cheapest form of new generation, certainly in Australia, and frankly in most countries, is a combination of renewables, mostly solar and wind, and storage. Whether that batteries, the cost of batteries is coming down so rapidly, but I would have said, and I am president of the International Hydropower Association, so I have a vested interest there. I'm a hydro developer myself with my wife Lucy. I think hydro, particularly for long durations, batteries for short durations, we can absolutely have a zero-emission electricity system. I mean, of course, you've got to manage it properly. You can't just snap your fingers. But I think we've got the tools. We've got to be careful about what I call technological McCorberism. You know, Mr. McCorber and David Copperfield, a rather hapless fellow who's always short of money, and he says, don't worry, to his long-suffering wife, he says, don't worry, something will turn up. Something will turn up. And so McCorberism is somebody who, is always saying, oh, don't worry, something will turn up. The cavalry will arrive at some point to save us. And there is a tendency, and I mean, Bill Gates, to be frank, has been guilty of this, and obviously a genius, one of the creators of the modern world. But, Gates is always saying, oh, there are going to be new technologies that are going to solve the problem for us. Well, there probably will be, but we've got the technologies now that can do the job, so we shouldn't delay action today. So in other words, we have the tools on the workbench to do the job today. Let's get on with it. And I think in most countries we are getting on with it. But hopefully, there'll be even better tools in the future. So I'm pretty upbeat about it. I mean, having said that, there's going to be some very big challenges, Damon. As you know, I mean, all of the adaptation. If you're living in a city that's built on a river mouth, as Helen was saying earlier today, and you're already a metre above high tide mark, and your city is sinking anyway because somebody's been pumping out the groundwater, so it's depressing. You've got big challenges.
Or on an isthmus like we are.
What?
On an isthmus like we are in Auckland. Yeah,
Yeah, sure, that's right. No, I agree. There's plenty of challenges, and there's plenty of warming that is built in. The big problem. Look, I've been saying this for nearly 20 years now, so I can be a bore on it, so I'll be quick. The big problem we've got, certainly in Australia and certainly in the US and in many other countries, I don't want to speak about New Zealand, you guys know that, you live here, is the issue of responding to global warming has been turned into a culture war issue of ideology. Now, it is not. It does not matter whether you believe in global warming or not. It's physics. I mean, you may not believe in gravity. I respect your disbelief in gravity. I do. I really do. I respect your disbelief in gravity. I urge you not to test your disbelief by stepping out of the second floor window. Try something a little bit lower to the ground, see how that goes. And it's the same with global warming. It's physics. I mean, Guterres said this in Belém a couple of days ago. It's physics. So, characters like Trump and, plenty of people in my country are essentially raging at reality. And so that's the problem. That's the one problem we've got. Having said that, despite all of that, the clean energy transition continues, and I think it's largely because the tech has made it cheaper.
Well, you can't adapt your way out of the crisis, right? If you don't do anything on the mitigation side of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, the cost of, quote, adaptation is going to be extremely steep. And I often think of that incredible report by Nicholas Stern, who used to be the Secretary of the UK Treasury and has become one of the foremost experts on climate finance. In his report released in the mid-2000s, he said, we either pay now or pay more later. So you pay now to invest in the greenhouse gas mitigation that will save you adaptation costs down the line. Mary Robinson, the former Irish president who was chair of the elders until just recently, she goes around saying, our best days are ahead of us, a fossil fuel-free future. And as Malcolm says, it's within our reach. I mean, fossil fuels haven't gone away yet. They're having a bit of a resurgence with Trump's encouragement, but this is a sunset industry. One of the roles I have as chair of the extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which was a tripartite initiative of governments, industry and civil society to fight corruption in the extractive sectors where it's long been a significant factor. And we've noticed, obviously the rearguard action of oil and gas to try and keep a foothold, but we encourage developing countries and many are late entrants to these markets, to look very carefully at where they put their own money. Let industry risk its money, but don't risk your own money on something that could sunset faster than you think, and you end up with the debts, but not the ongoing revenue flow. But watch the reports from Belém this week. There will be an official launch of a big forest fund, which Lula is sponsoring, because keeping the world's tropical forests is a global public good, and we can't expect poor countries to bear the whole burden of that. There needs to be some financing for it. Lula, of course, has to square why he's also thinking of oil exploration in the Amazon, which isn't quite so cheerful. But that fund will be important. And I think the world will get on with climate action regardless of what Donald Trump and his administration think. And of course, the US being the large and complicated place that it is, states like California, New York, huge populations, huge economies, they'll get on doing the business on climate action. So while the federal government may be missing in action, it may not matter as much as we think. However, they can be very disruptive at international negotiations, and there was a conference, plenary conference of the International Maritime Organization in the last 2 to 3 weeks, where they were expected to ratify a new convention on limiting greenhouse gas emissions from shipping. And the US led a rearguard action against this with a lot of bullying and I suppose tariff threats and various other forms of coercion. And in the event, that convention wasn't passed. So they, as I say, still disruptive in these kinds of settings.
I mean, one of the things, I just got back from China, one of the kind of things you notice in that transition, these unexpected benefits, and going from, if you imagine a Beijing before COVID, the noise levels are extraordinarily diminished because of the transition to electrical vehicles. Yeah. And it's just led to, as well as the air quality, and so I think it becomes a almost unstoppable force in those societies, like you said, quite a distributed.
Well, also they had their own reasons for acting, right? Forget about
the
international commitments, but the air pollution was horrific. And you now see, for example, business very reluctant to send employees to places where the air pollution levels are through the roof. I mean, you go to Delhi, you can taste the air in Delhi in November. It's horrible. I've been in Beijing on days where you can't see out the window. I've been in Kuala Lumpur, where the peat fires from Indonesia create a smog that thick that you can't see the building next to it. So this is all very worrying. Countries have to act for the health interests of their own people.
One thing, and I know many people in the room will have been struck by two prime ministers that were on different sides of aisles, although in different countries, finding such strong alignment on a range of issues, which currently in this moment does seem a little unusual, especially with such civility. One of those issues where we've heard you both speak really eloquently is about the geopolitical issues facing Asia Pacific. So as we look forward out a decade or so, what's the story for Australia and New Zealand look like? And this, I know it's something you're both expert in. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Malcolm and I have more or less taken the same position about the AUKUS AUKUS agreement. I mean, the arguments are different in Australia as I understand them, because Australia's had a submarine fleet since the 1960s, and these subs, which haven't had a further life extension, are coming to the end of their life. And they had an agreement with the French to buy some new submarines, and Scott Morrison trashed those and went off with Boris Johnson and Donald and Biden to buy these 8 nuclear submarines from the United States, which they may or may not ever get, by the way. For sure they'll get American bases with subs if they don't get their own subs. But I mean, this is causing a lot of soul searching in Australia. But the bigger issue is the role of China. And, I think back to my time as Prime Minister, where the overwhelming attitude towards China was one of opportunity. Everyone saw the opportunity in linking to the China market. Now Mayor Wayne Brown came with me as a businessman on the delegation where we went up to sign the free trade agreement. It opened doors for New Zealand. We did well out of that agreement. But suddenly, fast forward to now, the media, many are conditioned by, the thinking out of the US that we have to fear China. It's a terrible threat. Well, it is our biggest trading partner. China is not going to change its political system because we think it should change, right? It is what it is. Its people will determine its own destiny, but we have to get on and make our luck. Now, I would observe that it was possible to sign a free trade agreement with China in 2008. It has never been possible to sign a free trade agreement with the United States of America. There were hopes that we would get in through the back door with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Well, then Trump pulled out of that. We obviously have a long history with the US. The way it is at the moment, I'm starting to question the shared values because I think democracy is under such assault there and rule of law. China is a major power in our region. We have to find ways of engaging with it for our own future. I think we need to be doing, much more relationship building with the countries of Southeast Asia who let's face it, have been navigating around China as a major power for millennia. Just sort of look at the region not as a threat to us, but as one to which our prosperity is intimately linked.
Well, I'm not quite as sanguine about the risks as Helen is, but
they're not coming.
No, but I just say this. Look, what is a threat? A threat is the combination of capability and intent, okay? Capability takes a long time to put in place. Intent can change very quickly. Is China a threat to Australia and New Zealand? Well, not today. Does it have the capability to threaten us? Possibly. Does it have the intent? I can't see why it would. Will it in the future? Who knows? I mean, there has been exercises in economic coercion. China engages in massive espionage, particularly cyber espionage. Having said that, they are not alone. Okay, so it's the difference with China on the cyber espionage front is that they do it on a scale larger than anyone else, and they don't care that when they get caught, right? So they're sort of shameless. So what? So I think you've just got to manage risk. Okay, so I think and I think China. You've got to be honest and upfront with. When I say honest, I mean upfront with China about that. So for example, when we decided to ban Chinese vendors from 5G, and that was a technical decision. That was not a political decision at all. I could bore you witless if you wanted me to about 5G and virtualization and intelligent systems and so forth. So it was a technical decision. But we did not make a big deal out. This is my government. Did not make a big deal about it. We certainly did not bang the drum. We gave them heads up well in advance, and it was they didn't like it, but it was well understood. So I think you've got to. I think being needlessly belligerent or boisterous doesn't make any sense. But you do have to manage risk. And remember, sovereignty is important. I mean, remember, modern China was founded when under the Communist Party when Mao Zedong stood on the top of Tiananmen and said the Chinese people have stood up, right? Zhongguo Runmen Zanqi Lailo, I think. Anyway, there's probably some Mandarin speakers here who can correct me. But that's what he said. It was an assertion of sovereignty. And so we in Australia and you in New Zealand are entitled to assert your sovereignty. Your sovereignty matters as much to you as our sovereignty matters to me. as China's sovereignty does to China. So that's the message, and you're just saying we have to respect our sovereignty, and there will be things that we will collaborate with you till the cows come home, particularly energy and, renewables, where China is by far the world's leader. But there'll be some areas, security, critical infrastructure, where we'll just be a bit more careful. And that's not being rude. I mean, there are things that you would tell your wife or your husband that you wouldn't tell your friends at work, and there's things you'd tell your friends at work you wouldn't tell someone you were sitting next to on the bus, right? So we've got different levels of trust, and that's not being rude. So yeah, I think just manage that. I mean, as far as AUKUS is concerned, if I could just make this simple point about it, the problem with the AUKUS nuclear-powered submarine deal, I'm leaving aside issues of cost, which are stupid, eye-watering, but the real problem with it's a very unfair deal for Australia, because people say, will Donald Trump like AUKUS? He will love AUKUS. Donald Trump, I know Donald Trump very well. He will just be amazed that someone as dumb as Biden, in his view, was able to do a deal as unfavourable to Australia as this, and that we had a government that was stupid enough to do it, right? So anyway, the problem with it is we are providing the Americans with a submarine base in Western Australia and a dockyard to maintain their subs. We're giving them $3 billion to support their submarine industry. They have a commitment to sell us 5 Virginia-class submarines during the course of starting in 2032. But that condition is conditional on them being able to spare them, and that is set out in their legislation. So that's the deal. And they can't spare them. They need to be producing 2 a year to be able to replace the retirements in their own fleet. The current rate of production is 1.13. And, don't take my word for it. Vice Admiral Caudle gave evidence to the Senate Armed Services Committee in June or July. It's all there, right? So this is all, the Americans, give them credit for this, are actually pretty transparent about this stuff to their own legislature. So the probability is we'll end up with no subs, and we won't be able to say, oh, we've been dudded, we've been ripped off, because that was the deal. So if you don't, Trump is absolutely from the never give a sucker an even break school of business, and so the only thing will be going through Donald's mind will be, these people have got plenty of money and they're really dumb. There must be something else I can do with it. What? There must be another angle. If that Biden, worst president ever, if that Biden could get away with that deal, surely I can come up with something even more outrageous. So thankfully, we haven't seen any evidence of that yet. But anyway, that's the problem with AUKUS.
Maybe if I could take a tack from that discussion about AUKUS and the sort of regional geopolitics and focus in on the Pacific. So obviously Australia and New Zealand have deep connections and history and deep importance attached to the Pacific. What do you see as the major challenges that the Pacific will face, and what's the right or appropriate contribution for Australia and New Zealand to make in that Pacific setting?
Well, I think there's 3 big issues. One is obviously the climate crisis. So where you have low-lying atolls in particular, it's an existential threat. They may go under. Even where you don't have low-lying atolls like Samoa, I remember going there with a UNDP focus a number of years ago, and already around the coastline, you can't grow the old varieties of vegetables anymore. You have to have adaptation for these saline conditions because of the seawater encroachment into the groundwater and so on. So the Pacific needs a lot of help with adaptation. Also for its conversion to clean energy. They've been mostly importing a lot of oil to run things on, whereas renewable energy is pretty abundant in the Pacific if you can get the technology in there to do it. So we can be very helpful on those scores, both adaptation and mitigation. Then on the health front, there's the health crisis, the rate of NCDs. The Pacific has good strategies on this, but it's one thing to go from strategy to then policy to then, the kinds of actions that will help people to live healthier lives. This is going to be a huge burden, already a big burden on their health systems. Then you have the economic viability issues. These are small states, remote locations. The labour schemes with New Zealand and now Australia are pretty important. Obviously, there's been a lot of permanent migration to New Zealand, but it's a question of how many generations the remittances keep going back, usually about one, and then people put their roots down and have their commitments and obligations and costs here in the country of migration. Then there's the geopolitical contestation where obviously, China builds and pays for quite a lot, but doesn't give a lot away. It's mostly loans. There's quite a high level of debt from a number of countries in the Pacific to China. And of course, with that goes then a certain amount of string pulling. Australia is now the second biggest contributor into the Pacific. It's really pulling its weight. I think we could pull our weight rather more. But New Zealand and Australia can never take the friendship of the Pacific for granted. There are, as you say, long ties. Some of them haven't been so great. I ended up, as PM, making the historic apology to Samoa for the wrongs committed during colonisation. We haven't been saints, really, with respect to the Pacific at all. But we have to treat Pacific nations with respect. And be as supportive as we can with the challenges that they face, which are quite deep.
That wasn't a very optimistic take on that. So maybe what's the opportunity in that? And right now, for instance, the Cook Islands and New Zealand relationship is probably at the lowest ebb we've seen since independence.
Well, people need to talk face to face. At the moment, New Zealand Prime Minister and Foreign Minister are refusing to talk face-to-face seriously about the issues. I mean, for the record, I think the way the Cook Islands government handled this was very duplicitous. On the other hand, I can't believe New Zealand didn't know exactly what was happening. It just was never told officially. But the Cook Islands has never opted for full independence. I don't think its people would accept that because they like the New Zealand citizenship and passport, which gives a lot of mobility and opportunity. And with that has gone a certain level of New Zealand support, which has obviously come under strain now, and a lot of funding's actually suspended. So the Cook Islands should not have been signing, without consultation with New Zealand, a far-reaching strategic partnership agreement with China. And I think a major interest for China is access to critical minerals in the seabed. And the Cook Islands is one of the foremost out there arguing for seabed mining, which I must say I'm hugely opposed to. We do not know what ecosystem damage we'd be doing. Most of the deep ocean has never been researched. We have no idea what species we'd put out of operation with deep sea mining. The agreement the Cooks signed was far-reaching enough to say that they would support each other with international candidacies. We would never sign an agreement like that. Yeah. So, it wasn't sensible. On the other hand, New Zealand, I think, needs to be in intense dialogue with the Cooks to try and sort this out. Because if we keep freezing the money, where are they going to go for the money? The same people they've signed the strategic partnership with, one assumes. So this isn't so bright, and all one can advocate for is kanohi o te kanohi. Get into dialogue, but we're in a standoff at the moment.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the Cook Island issue or sufficiently familiar to comment on that, but yeah, I agree there's no substitute for plenty of dialogue. I'll just add a coda to this, and I'll give you an example. You can't go around as a developed country lecturing people, right? Which is very common to do, very common thing to do. You've got to be providing practical help. Helen's absolutely right that a lot of the Chinese infrastructure funding has come in the way of loans in some of these countries. Tonga in particular is heavily indebted. which is crazy, okay? Because they'll never be able to repay the money. It's not the way to go for obvious reasons. So, I'll give you an example. When this would have been about 2017, the Solomon Islands, there'd been this very complicated and questionable process about the provision of a fibre optic cable service to the Solomons and PNG, and there'd been a process which was then overturned by the Solomon Islands government, like an open process. I'm cutting a very complicated story very short. Bottom line was there was a proposal for Huawei, the Chinese company, with Chinese loan finance to do a fibre optic cable to link PNG, Solomon Islands, and the idea was that it would connect to the internet in Australia. And our security people said, oh, we don't like that. And needless to say. And I said, well, okay. And they said, no, we just say no. And I said, well, if we just say no, they'll take it somewhere else. They'll land it somewhere else. I said, what we've got to do is have an alternative solution. They said, what's that? And I said, look, we'll just build it ourselves, build it for them. Let's forget all this nonsense about, having a huge loan and take it out of our aid budget. And so was called the Coral Cable. It's been up and running for quite a few years. And it connects PNG and the Solomons. It's operated by a company called Focus. I think we paid for 80% of it. But that provided them with a solution. So in other words, you can't say to a developing country, you mustn't do that, that's a really terrible idea, and then not come up with a viable alternative. You've got to say, that's a terrible idea, or that's not a great idea. No, don't say it's a terrible idea, because that's sort of insulting their judgment. Say, you know what, I don't think that's a great idea. I've got a better idea. Here it is. You've got to provide a constructive alternative.
Well, that's a real need, right?
Correct. That's exactly. And you're dead right, Damon and Helen are talking about energy. Again, technology comes to our aid. The great thing about solar is and batteries is that they are so modular. And this is the amazing. If you think about it, if you are living in a hut in the bush, and you've got one solar panel on your roof to maybe charge your phone, probably. You might need more than one to do that, probably. But let's say you've just got one there. That is the same panel as if you have a huge solar farm with 5 million panels. And so it's that modularity that has resulted in the costs coming down. That's why the cost per watt's come down over the last decade by, well over 90%. And similar economies of scale with batteries. So for a lot of these island communities, they absolutely can get off the diesel genset with a combination of solar and a battery. Some places they could do pumped hydro, mini hydro, but that obviously has more cost, and you need it. It doesn't work in atolls because you don't have any elevation. So.
It was striking earlier this year when Australia signed a deal with Papua New Guinea, which the centrepiece of was actually a rugby league team.
Yeah.
And that sort of speaks to both the shared values, but also the ability to fill a real need, which is the love for rugby league.
Yeah.
We'll come to the audience for some questions shortly, but I've got a couple more questions I'm really keen to put to you both. One is really taking us a little bit further on the question of the future of democracy in a world. We do seem to, as many have observed, be living in a world where populists and maybe even autocrats have gained more of a presence, especially in the Western, what were previously seen as the Western democracies. What should the sort of centre-left and centre-right parties and the sort of champions of democracy be doing in an age like this?
Well, populism doesn't arise in a vacuum. It arises where people aren't feeling well served by their country for a range of reasons. And there's a lot of pressures on all countries. COVID was quite divisive, but as well as the divisions in society which the reaction to it drove, it also caused a lot more fiscal problems for just about everybody. And when you've got major fiscal problems, then you either try to grow and invest your way out of them, or some try to cut their way out of them. And whatever, there's severe pressure on public spending. Unemployment rates aren't what they were before. So people are disgruntled, and with reason. They feel no one's delivering. And in that sort of context, those with very simplistic and probably very counterproductive solutions can get some traction. We also can't overlook the role of social media, which creates echo chambers for conspiracy theories, for people to go down rabbit holes of very, very strange beliefs. Our democracies are under a lot of pressure at the moment. We may see more short-term governments as people try this, try that, try the other, all quite destabilising, really. Meantime, if you stand back and look at it objectively, people will look at the authoritarian states like the Chinas and say, well, they don't have to worry about all of that. They get on and plan and do things, and that's not a great model either. But you can see how it might be attractive to aspiring autocrats around the world.
So what should we be doing at that moment? Is there something that is not happening that should?
Well, I picked up the 3 T's theory from Malcolm, which is truth and transparency equal trust. So if you're going to try and rebuild trust in governance, you have to be very clear about what your analysis of the situation is, what you believe the solutions are, be very transparent, and if you promise things, keep your word. I think you also go through periods in democracies where people feel that promises are broken, and then you get a cynicism set in, fewer people vote, it becomes a downward spiral. So I think that we do need a rebuilding of trust in our democratic systems, where politicians are more candid about the scale of the challenges, but also about the way they see forward, and then invite people to join them on that journey. But don't promise paradise tomorrow, because you can't fulfill it.
I think in terms of promises, it's one thing to promise an action, to say the government will do this, the government will build a road here, build a bridge there, build a hospital there. That's something you can fulfil. When you promise an outcome, you've got to be very careful about, like saying, we are going to adopt these policies and we promise this will bring electricity prices down. Well, the reality is electricity prices are affected by a whole lot of factors, not all of which are under your control. So you've got to be really careful about that. I think make us few. Oddly enough, I wasn't in politics, or certainly not in politics or as PM as long as Helen was, but I was never accused of breaking a promise, that as far as I can recall. And that's partly because I've made virtually none. So probably my legal background. When I had that sort of terrible row with Trump, which actually about an immigration deal I'd done with Obama. When I say a deal, it was a signed agreement. It wasn't, a handshake. And Trump wanted to pull out of it, and I held him to it. And, we had blazing row about it. He was furious, and that actually won his respect. So, just confirmed what I've always felt, that the only way to deal with bullies is to stand up with them. But interestingly, Trump made the point to me, he said, you're a businessman, you must have reneged on deals. And I said, no, I don't. I keep my word. And so, but that's very important. But again, don't promise, don't overpromise, and also set expectations. That is a very important thing. But ultimately, the best way to deal with, autocrats and populist characters, authoritarian populists, is for liberal democracy to deliver. I think it helps to have a good electoral system. I make no comment on MMP, but I have to say I have never met anyone who voted for it in New Zealand. There must have been a lot of people that did. Has someone put their hand up, Tim?
Yeah, he did.
I did.
Okay, you did. All right. Well, I've had my Kiwi friends have always complained about it, and I said, well, some of you must have voted for it. Anyway, but I leave that arcane question to you. But we're lucky in Australia. We've had for 100 years plus compulsory voting and preferential voting, and that combination brings politics to the centre. And so if you run off to the extremes to satisfy crazy people on Sky News and that sort of thing, in these, media echo chambers, that you lose the centre, and that's what's happened to the Liberal Party in Australia. And that's why they've lost, so many. They've got virtually no city seats now, which means Australia is one of the most highly urbanised countries in the world. So you cannot form government unless you can win in the cities.
So I'm going to turn to the floor, and often in academic environments, you say we should have questions rather than speeches sort of disguised as questions, and that way we might be able to get through a few more.
I don't mind a speech as long as it's got to be short. So.
Yeah, short speeches. So we've got 2 mics going around, and I'll let the mic holders maybe take the one at the front, please, Jeremy. Oh.
Thank you. Kia ora. Thank you both very much. I'm Myra from AUT. I won't give a speech. I got the command there clearly, Damon, thank you. Hey, my question is really simple. I love the idea of compulsory voting. I can't understand why we don't have it here. So 2 questions. One for Helen. Why don't we have it here, and why don't we have any real talk about it? And secondly, for Malcolm, are there any downsides to it that we should know about if we want to make some noise and try to get some compulsory voting here? Kia ora.
Well, I must say I've never supported it because I think the right to vote does include the right not to vote, and that can be an expression of dissent, discontent in itself. I think it's incumbent on those who seek political office to be, encouraging the process and encouraging, sufficient trust in it that it is a civic duty. I think that our voting rates have gone down enormously since the time I first voted.
Every single one since MMP.
Yes, it's not great. We used to have over 90% voting. I think we struggled.
We just barely hit 70, I think.
Well, it's much less than it was. It may partly be that there are many new New Zealanders who are not always coming from countries with a tradition of voting. I mean, those from the Indian subcontinent, by and large, have a tradition of voting, but if you're coming from China, there hasn't been a tradition of voting. So I do wonder whether we could do more by way of civics education in schools about the importance of voting and understanding the basic constitutional arrangements of New Zealand and the role of Parliament and the importance of, you as a citizen exercising your voting rights.
Well, can I'll hit downsides, but before I'll just clarify something. It's not compulsory. I mean, we say compulsory voting in Australia, that if you say that in Australian academic ordinance, there'll be some pedant that will say, no, it's not compulsory to vote. It's compulsory to attend a polling place and take a ballot paper. Whether you actually cast a vote is a matter for you. Okay, fair. Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Yeah, but so...
That was praise for academics there.
There are people that will turn up and take a ballot paper and write, you're all a bunch of liars, or, or spoil the ballot paper. It's also compulsory to be on the electoral roll. Yeah. We estimate that about 97.5%, 98% of people eligible to be on the roll, i.e. Australians over the age of 18, are on the roll, and around 90% of them vote. A bit more in some electorates, some in less. Of course, you've got people overseas. So there are legitimate excuses for not voting. Washing your hair is not an excuse, but it is, particularly if you're prepared to be disingenuous, you can easily avoid the fine. I'd never encourage anyone to do that. The fine is, I can't remember what it is now, it's $20 or something. I think it's a bit more in New South Wales for the state elections, but it is It's honestly not. I can't see any downside to it at all. Why is it a good thing? It's a good thing because it means that you don't have to run off to the extremes to get your base out. So if you look at the United States, if a Republican candidate wants to get the base out, they go guns, lock them up, down, drive out the immigrants, like every extreme to fire up the base and get them, drag them away from watching Fox News and go into the polling booth and vote. Well, everyone has to do it in Australia. The other thing that's a big plus about it, and this is again this is not real. I understand not an issue here, but in some countries it is. If you make voting compulsory, you've got to make it really easy to vote. So you cannot. So in the United States, they have this terrible practice of voter suppression, where they actually make it hard to vote, which to an Australian is just. I mean, the thing that I find most baffling about America is their guns. I cannot believe this culture that everyone's entitled to have a military-style armoury in their house. We don't understand that. But the other one I don't understand is this idea that you could discourage people or prevent people from voting. But if you make it compulsory, you've got to make it really easy to vote, and we do. So it's you don't say we don't.
My daughter lives there. She employs 50 Australians, and she's not allowed to vote.
But yeah, well, that's right, because she's not. That's right. She's not. It's under the law.
She employs more than 50 of them.
But she's not entitled to vote. Oh, see, if I lived here, I wouldn't be.
You make that saying that everybody votes because you've made it compulsory. A select group of the people who live in your country are compulsory.
Yeah, but the citizens vote. I mean, the citizens.
No, in New Zealand, the permanent residents.
Okay, right.
New Zealand has a very expansive position on
Do you?
votes.
Yeah. No. Well, rightly or wrongly, in our system, there are actually British citizens who arrived, sometime in the 80s. I can't remember what the date is. Included. That's a kind of historical thing, but basically, to vote in an Australian election, you have to be an Australian citizen. I mean, maybe we should have allowed New Zealanders to vote, but it's pretty. Most countries do limit voting to citizens, to be honest.
We have a question over here.
Kia ora, Connor. We've kind of seen in a lot of, especially Western countries, including New Zealand and Australia, a lot of increasing internal inequality. Yeah. I'm wondering if either of you have any thoughts on how much that could be, shall we say, negatively impacting kind of some of the stuff that's going on, and if there are any solutions that you see.
Well, I think it's a huge issue, and I think housing affordability in particular is a massive issue in just about every Western jurisdiction. I know there's been property price declines in recent times in New Zealand, but in Australia, it's a massive issue. I think I do. I think it is and you've got to, that's why you've got to make sure that you've got a good safety net, that and you've got to have a productive workforce, right? You've got to be able to ensure that it's one thing to have a minimum wage, but you want to make sure that people who are coming into the workforce, at a low wage because they're starting, are able to move into jobs that are better rewarded and opportunities that are better rewarded. So, yeah, look, it is. You're absolutely right. It's a big. It's a big issue.
It's a huge issue, and housing has driven it pretty hard and fast. I mean, the attacks on public housing here have caused enormous poverty. I mean, certainly through much of my time in politics, people in public housing paid no more than 25% of their income in rent. Now, if you don't have the opportunity as a low-income household, whether one individual, a couple or a family, to have your rent at that kind of level, if you're paying 50%, it doesn't leave much for the, for anything else. The car breaks down, the fridge breaks down, quality of food, the rest of it. So part of the solution lies in the housing supply issue. I mean, incomprehensibly, the state housing building program's been virtually cancelled here, which is crazy. How we'll ever get back the building workforce that has fled the other side of the Tasman, I don't know. But we just don't have sufficient housing supply for the range of incomes across the country. If you've got the money, buy what you want. But the lack of supply is now affecting not only the lowest income households, but as we know, many young people who'd like to get their own place and think about where they could raise a family. So these are huge generational issues too. But I would start with housing and really flooding the market with supply to meet that, and then look at the adequacy of our social security today. But with full employment and affordable housing, you deal with a lot of the issues.
Mm-hmm. Got another question at the front.
I've got a question.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Fraser Carson. Hello, Helen. It's been nearly 26 years.
Yeah.
First thing I'd like to say is there is, of course, an elephant in the room, and that elephant is coloured orange. And I'd like to congratulate Malcolm in speaking out. It is a very early world leader in this regard. The thing that I wanted to say is that I think that the biggest issue that the world faces at the moment is a loss of social cohesion, and I was very pleased to see that the Foundation issued that report on that. Well, I think one of the biggest impacts on social cohesion is digital communications, and I'm not talking about fibre optic or broadband or anything like that. I'm talking about digital communication or cultural infrastructure between people. Because we have a digital sugar, which means that we're driving people into echo chambers. That digital sugar means that we're losing trust in authority, losing trust in mainstream media. When that trust goes, it means that we elect odd people into very big places like the White House. It means that we're not voting, we're not standing for local councils, all of those things. So I have to say that we're doing some stuff with the Papua New Guinea government at the moment to address some of those things, because Barack Obama a few years ago said we need to reinvent how we use the internet. So I just put that out there as something that actually I think is under the radar, gets very little attention, and we need to address.
Well, I think another thing that needs to be somehow incorporated into our school curriculum is media literacy and how you gather your information. I mean, you don't want to tell people what to believe, but at least try to communicate that you need to cross-check what you're seeing. You see all sorts of outlandish things, right? But the first question should be, well, is that true? Skepticism, critical thinking. Where would I go to, cross-check this? And there are reputable news sources, and they don't always get it right either, which is why it pays to, shop around a bit and see what informed people and quality media are saying. But in the absence of that kind of approach, more and more people will be led down these rabbit holes into the conspiracy theories.
Yeah. And of course we have a new powerful enabler of media which has the verisimilitude of truth. The AI is producing videos which are very difficult to tell.
No, I agree. Helen's right. Discernment, the ability to, check the footnotes or find the footnotes and, find out what's the... I totally agree with you. That's absolutely right.
Kia ora, Prime Minister Turnbull, Prime Minister Clark. My name is Nana Hong. I'm a young professional in public policy. I studied my master's degree at NTU in Singapore, and I know that both of you have had quite a lot of engagement with the city-state. And I was just curious in terms of, do you think that both Australia and New Zealand sort of think about a lot of their economic policies? I know that they have a lot of sovereign funds, a massive pension system, and fiscally they're doing really, really well. And just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. And I think their foreign policy itself is quite more balanced and measured. And being two very experienced leaders in that field, so I thought I'd just ask that.
Well, the city-state was really New Zealand's entry point to Asia. And there's been a lot of interaction with all of Singapore's leaders from the time of independence. I think in terms of the sovereign wealth fund approach, Australia's done a lot better at that than we have. That your savings scheme going back decades has a huge sovereign wealth fund now. The so-called Helen fund, the superannuation fund, aimed to do the same. It hasn't had the same level of investment, unfortunately, but could be bigger and better. But let's also remember that Singapore is quite an authoritarian state, and it has a capacity to just, the government decides it's going to do things, and it does them. And power doesn't really change in Singapore. It's had the same party ruling since the time of independence, whereas we live in a more contested political environment which doesn't give you the same kind of linear direction, for better or worse. But there is a lot to admire about Singapore. There are also things to be concerned about. The capital punishment, the judicial corporal punishment, which I found really a form of torture. So yeah, it ain't perfect by any means, but there are some things to take note of.
I'm a huge fan of Singapore. I think it's got all the advantages and disadvantages of being a tiny country, in square kilometres, and a city-state, but its achievements are extraordinary, really extraordinary. I mean, when you think what they've done. They've got a tradition of honest, non-corrupt, technocratic government, which is very impressive, particularly when you look at what's happening elsewhere in the world. In terms of urbanism, and I really admire the way, and again, these are all, you would say, penetrating glimpses of the obvious, but most people forget about it. Rather than doing what most other places do is build the suburb, put the people in there and then go, oh gosh, we haven't got any transport infrastructure. We better think about building a metro or a subway or something. The Singaporeans put in the infrastructure, put in the metro, put in the rail, all of that, and then put the residential development in so much smarter. I'm a gigantic fan, and I mean, Helen says they're authoritarian. Yeah, well, I guess so. But I mean, I'll just give you an example, right? I mean, all of these things have limitations. I was having dinner one night. I spent a bit of time in Singapore, and I was having dinner one night with Lee Hsien Loong, former Prime Minister, who's now Senior Minister, and a European leader. I won't say who it was. But the European leader was arguing, a former leader in fact, was arguing that that free speech should enable you to burn the Quran in public. And Lee Hsien Loong said, no. He said, you've got to understand how this country was founded. He said, this country came about because in the 60s you had race riots, and you had the Malays running down one street with a machete saying, kill the Chinese, and the Chinese running down the other street saying, kill the Malays, and Indians running around trying to avoid being killed by everybody else. And that's not on. That's not going to happen. And I must say, I thought he was absolutely right. So, I think if you've got a multicultural society, you've got to be really careful how you manage this, and it's nuanced, but if you've got a multicultural society, and New Zealand's multicultural society, as is Australia, as is Singapore, you've got to ensure that people are respectful to each other. And if they want to have an abstruse debate about the relative theological merits of, one religion or another, that's fine. But if they want to go around insulting people's religion in a humiliating public way, that's crazy, and we all know it's crazy. And if people want to do that, they shouldn't be allowed to do it.
Well, I think we're running out of time, and I'm going to just reserve a little bit of time to acknowledge where we are, which is to ask you both about something that is at the forefront of, obviously, AOT's thinking, which is about the future of universities. I know that Australia's been thinking about that 50-year anniversary since Whitlam. One of the things Whitlam did was revolutionise the access to Australian universities.
Yeah.
Since that time, of course, a lot of change has happened. And then on the other hand, we see in the US especially, but elsewhere in the world, universities under dedicated assault, freedom of speech, investment in research. Wondering what you have in your minds about the future of universities and where they should be headed.
Well, they should be headed to, they're places of learning, of education, of research. They should be a place of free and open and respectful discussion.
No burning of Qurans.
No. Well, I mean, I'll give you an example. I'll give you a little snapshot of the sort of thing that universities got to be tough on. So a couple of years ago now, I was invited by the Sydney University law students to come and give a talk. And I turned up at the Sydney University Law School, which I had attended many years ago, and there would have been about 120 young students there, and it looked like modern Australia. That is to say, maybe 45% of the room sort of more or less looked like me, but there were people with, Asian backgrounds, South Asian backgrounds, or like the whole. It's modern Australia. It's a multicultural society. And that was fine. And then in burst a group of revolutionaries who all looked like me, right? And who had loud hailers, and they were denouncing me and disrupting the meeting and trying to prevent it happening. And the university security were there, all these big guys who looked like they were sort of ex-soldiers or cops or something, and they did absolutely nothing, because they said to me subsequently they're not allowed to touch the students, and I thought, well, what's the point, touch the students. Anyway, I might say the New South Wales police have no such inhibitions, but anyway, and one of these guys was really close to me, like about that far apart, with a loud hailer, screaming at me, calling me homophobic, which, given I legalised gay marriages, I thought of all of my crimes, that probably wasn't on the list. Anyway, he was really close. And, in the days when I had a close personal protection team, that no way that could have happened. And these big security guys were doing nothing. And there was a young woman, a law student, who was Afghan and was dressed, had a sort of a black suit on and a hijab, and had been, I found out later, been an Afghan refugee. Maybe she was 5 foot tall. It's probably less. And she came up between me and that guy. I'm getting quite emotional about it because, the courage she showed was so inspiring. And she just said, "You're too close, back off." He was towering over her. And I thought to myself, what a great country, and what a bunch of dicks these revolutionaries are, because they're just horrible, privileged, entitled people who think they can prevent a public meeting going on because they've got loud hailers. And anyway, but that's the kind of thing. Now, to give Sydney University credit, they actually suspended a couple of them. So they should have done, because, it's one thing to turn up to a meeting and say, "You're full of shit," or, "I don't agree with you for the following reasons." But when you turn up and use violence, which is those loud hailers are, practically shatter your eardrums. When you do that, you are essentially behaving like a fascist. And that type of cancel culture, which is so prevalent, and you see it, Helen was talking about it, seeing it, in universities in Europe and the United States, that is something we should have zero tolerance for. People are entitled to express their views, and if, some group, whether they're revolutionaries or not, who want to shut down discussion, that should never be allowed. So I think that's an important thing for universities to stand up for. And as I'm sure you would here at your university, Vice-Chancellor.
I would stand in the middle too, yeah.
Yeah, I think our universities are under a lot of pressure. And I think it's very important that we not see universities just as a place where people come to get a meal ticket. Universities are places to continue your education broadly. I don't like the fact that avenues for research funding for the arts and humanities have been cut off from the Marsden Fund, and I think from the Horizon Fund as well. You know, I came obviously through arts, humanities, social sciences, and I'll defend them as, you know, sending out citizens who can undertake a wide range of roles in the society. I don't think we're investing enough in our universities. We've put them in really a wedge position. We kept their numbers, we kept what they can charge, and then we underinvest in them. Well, hey presto, we're falling down the international rankings. We don't have any universities in New Zealand, the top 150 now. A couple struggle into the wedge between 150 and 200 in the world. Other countries are investing a lot. You know, people who interact with China will know the effort they put into their prestigious universities. So, yeah, I think we are undervaluing the sector and its contribution. It needs investment, it needs support.
Well, certainly our position. Well, it has really been a pleasure and an honour to welcome you both here to AUT. I know I speak for everyone that we appreciate not just what you've said and the way you've said it, but the spirit of leadership and public service that you practiced as leaders and particularly practiced since then. And I think that is something that's given us all optimism and a real cause for gratitude.